Coming up, Ben Simmons' back is intact, and he is on the attack as the Brooklyn Nets kick off their preseason against the Lakers. It was a 129-126 loss, but who cares? We're talking the return of Ben, Cam Thomas, and the rotation the Brooklyn Nets could implement in the season ahead. Let's get into it next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, sir. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He is Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infection. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. And Doug, this is basketball. I don't care, preseason or otherwise. This is NBA action for the Brooklyn Nets, and we have a lot to dive into, first and foremost with Ben Simmons. But this is a buzz, right, man? You're feeling the juice.
Yeah. Oh, basketball's back, baby. Like real live, actual players. Like, you know, a lot of questions around what the Nets were going to look like. A lot of questions around just, you know, who they were going to start. And I don't know. We're finally here. We're finally back. And there's plenty to dive into after watching the beginning of this game, which I think we can probably take a lot here and chew on in terms of the positive, just like overall positivity.
We're going to talk about Cam Thomas. Obviously, he gets inserted into this starting lineup, as we all knew was going to be the case. There's no Cameron Johnson in this as well. We'll get into the rotation and how deep we think that this team is going to be going here. But we'll go ahead and take a look at, first and foremost, Ben Simmons, what we believe is going to be potentially an opportunity for him to lead this team offensively, set the table offensively, and be a driving force on both ends of the floor. The health is what mattered most here for him. And we got the sample size that we never did in a Brooklyn Nets uniform tonight. And I'm not overstating that. Everything about his game looked healthy, looked fluid, including a mid-second quarter jam where you were like, oh, okay, Ben Simmons is healthy and ready to play.
I mean, this was the number one thing we were out here looking for, and we've talked about this a ton of times over the course of the offseason, right? Like, what was Ben Simmons going to look like in the first preseason game? How much of the eye test was he going to pass? For two guys like us that really just actually don't do a lot of eye test stuff, right? Like, it's, want to make sure we're just kind of factoring in and being really level-headed with our takes, just because I think that's just the better way to go with this stuff. But with Simmons, it really was one of these things, like, we might just know at least on a very, very macro level what the health looks like for him based on what the first couple minutes look like. Does he look fluid? Does he look aggressive? Does he look, just frankly, just the opposite of what he looked like last year, which was very timid, which is very stiff, right? And all the signs out of camp and all the word out of camp was that this was not going to be the case. But honestly, until you see it, you just can't really believe it. And I think that we saw it here, right? Like, I think we saw him getting back to the version, this 2019, 2020 version of Ben Simmons, who's aggressive, who looks like he wants to be on the ball, who looks like he wants to attack the rim, who looks like he just wants to be on the court, honestly. And it was really, really refreshing to be able to see that. Emphatic dunk by him in transition. And, where he hung on the rim and kind of flung his body out. Like, these are just things that didn't happen last year at all. Right. And there was such a timid nature to him. We know now because he was hurt and he was in a lot of pain, but he just looked like exactly the opposite kind of guy. And if you're a Nets fan, you have to really start getting excited about what he can show, because for the first time in a Nets uniform, he actually looks like the version they thought they were trading for when they traded James Harden.
Yeah, 14 minutes of game action, 4 of 6 from the field, 2 of 4 at the line. The most important note there is 4. Got to the line 2 times, right, on fouls. So he was driving the lane, getting into the contact, and looked absolutely comfortable doing so. So he gives you 10 points to go along with his 3 assists. And just on the note of him looking good in the eye test, this is the silly one, and this is towards the end of his 14 minutes on the court. He comes across half court, does kind of a hop, a skip, a twist, a turn, flings the ball behind his back while jumping through the air at the top of the key. It bounces off Cam Thomas' hands, goes out of bounds. But to your point, like, but he was like smiling when he did it. And it was just like, there's this lightness and fluidity to his game that if you didn't know that he had played basketball before coming to the Brooklyn Nets, you would say, I didn't know that this guy was capable of. We all knew he was. So he finally puts it together. From a basketball standpoint, we also got the sample size of what it's going to look like, right? He needs to be attacking downhill, getting into the teeth of the defense, and finding perimeter guys that can knock down shots. We also saw him with Nicholas Claxton, if we want to do the and one off of him before we get to Cam Thomas. What was your initial take on how this looks, understanding no Cameron Johnson in this lineup, right? It's not the perfect version of it, but I at least think that we can set the expectation that this can be successful, that they can run an offense through Ben Simmons with that starting lineup and still be productive on the offensive end.
Yeah, look, we talked about this before. The spacing when he plays with Claxton is going to be an issue. I think you probably have to grin and bear it just because you need to put them both on the court at the same time. If Simmons is going to look like this, you can't come off the bench, right? And then so you're just going to be dealt with this kind of sort of like bum hand around like what the fit is going to be. In terms of the basketball piece of it, I think there was like still a little, I don't think it had anything to do with health, but I think there was still a little bit of timidness from his part where he was running like to these top of the key sort of foul line extended DHO things where he just wasn't doing much to start the game in an offensive flow, or just like, was sort of hot potatoing at the start. But as the game went on, the thing that really made Simmons elite when he was with Philly was that he obviously can't shoot threes and he can't really space, but if you sagged off him, he would get you on your heels and he would get downhill to the basket where he would be able to finish in traffic, where he'd be able to draw fouls, where he would basically just be able to he would be able to get with speed for past you on the first sort of wrong step that you took defensively. He did that at least twice in this game, right? He had one where he did it to LeBron, where he took LeBron off the dribble and finished with a floater. He did another one where it was Hachimura maybe, where he got him going into the lane and just got to the rack. Like, those are the things that we need to see from him. It's never going to solve the non-spacing completely, but last year it was like worst of all worlds. He wasn't spacing and he wasn't doing that, right? And so if he can at least attack on the margins on smaller defenders or slower defenders, he's going to be able to mitigate some of the spacing issues. And again, tonight was one of the first times where we saw him actually doing it in a Nets uniform. And if you're a fan, you have to feel really, really encouraged by that, because it has to happen all season long. He cannot stop doing that for the length of the entire season.
Yeah, this was 14 minutes in the first preseason game. Now do it for the rest of the preseason, then 82 more games in the regular season, and we'll all be satisfied. Coming up here in a second, a footnote about Nicholas Claxton and his performance tonight before we turn our attention over to one Cam Thomas, a starting opportunity, and our takeaways from what we saw from him.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Jase Medical. The Jase case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. The worst thing you can be when it comes to medical stuff is unprepared, right? There's just so many things going on in the world. You got supply chain issues. You just got, sometimes getting things delivered to you on time. Sometimes just getting to a doctor's office can be really, really hard, right? Like, they just don't have openings. And you need antibiotics. You're sick. What's going to be able to help you. You just want to be able to get it. This is where Jase Case and Jase Medical have figured it out. Created by doctors, run by doctors. You can go online. You fill out a form. You get a prescription. You're going to get those life-saving medications right to your door. It's going to give you peace of mind. So you're not just hoping to access medication in an emergency. You're going to have it when you need it. You can get $20 off these life-saving antibiotics today from Jase Medical by using the code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. Look, folks, solve this for yourself. Jase is helping you do it right now, so you're not going to get stuck when you need it the most. Go to jasemedical.com. Use the code LOCKEDON. That's Jase, Jase, medical.com.
So as we continue our coverage of the Brooklyn Nets' first preseason game against the LA Lakers and takeaways that we have for it, a reminder, go to joinsubtext.com/lockedonnets, because that is where, especially after a game like this, you can keep the conversation going with Doug Norrie and myself. It's free, 14-day trial, and then a cup of coffee just to go ahead and talk about Spencer Dinwiddie if we don't get to him enough, or the plethora of young guys that saw some court time here in the second half. Join subtext.com/lockedonnets. Now, the note real quick before we get to Cam Thomas, just on Nicholas Claxton, again, we said this all off season. We believe he's ready to take that next step. 16 minutes, 3 of 3 from the field, gets to the line. It's all good. The 4 rebounds, great. The way that he also played, I thought, stylistically, when he had the ball in transition when Ben Simmons was off the court, because Simmons comes out about midway through that first quarter and Claxton stays out there. And then you have Day'Ron come in, and unfortunately, he goes down with an apparent ankle injury. He also was doing similar things. He's not the same athlete. He's not going to be the same table setter as Ben Simmons, but he was driving with a purpose down into the paint and then looking to find shooters with consistency. And I think if we're talking about a philosophy for Jacque Vaughn and this coaching staff, it needs to be that there's a repeatable thing that certain models of players have to do with consistency. Claxton showed that, and he also showed that ability to get down low and actually attack towards the basket again, that next phase of his offensive game, which I thought was impressive.
Yeah, they both have to be able to do it. Actually, it was like I put out some on Twitter real quick, put out like my highs and lows from the first half. And those, the Simmons and Claxton sort of attacking the rim were 2 of them, with Claxton looked really comfortable. And like the LeBron and AD thing, like that's no joke. These guys are, especially AD, is like Anthony Davis might be the best interior defender in basketball, right? So this is not necessarily an easy case. So I think it's gonna be just to put a pin on the Simmons piece and the Claxton piece here before we get the Cam, but I think it's just going to be a work in progress. I think there are going to be times where it looks frustrating and stagnant, just because I just kind of don't think there's any way around it with these two guys. And I think you just saw at least enough from Simmons tonight to know that it's at least a best foot forward case with them playing together, right? And I'm not sure we always would have said that with Simmons here, but I think what he showed tonight, even in a limited sample, makes you at least feel a little bit better about it's not going to be perfect, but it might not be a train wreck, right? And it's just like that's what it needs not to be. And but we can talk about Cam. But yeah, no, I think that's gonna be a running thing, because I think it's just going to be something that's just not always going to look great, but it's clear that that's what they probably just have to do.
Yeah, and I think hopefully it's just not the 30 to 40 games that Ben Simmons said, right? Check back to me at the midway point of the season. Maybe it's closer to 20 when we get a real sense of them getting comfortable on the court together. 22 minutes, 9 of 14, 4 of 7 from deep, perfect from the line, rebounds, assists galore. Cam Thomas. Like we all knew he would get the starting nod here. I'm like a flapjack because I'm flipping up and over with this guy. I can't decide if I believe in him. I think I do. I don't think the team does. But then they give him a chance here. And I'll say, I think that he also showed inside of the offense, and this is important when he's on the court with both Ben Simmons and Spencer Dinwiddie in this instance, he has to be able to play off ball. He has to be able to wait his opportunity and play within the offense. I thought he took a good step forward tonight, and then it starts to cook. Obviously, you bring him out of the game.
I was shocked. I was shocked.
Yeah.
I can't. When Nets PR, they released it, 30 minutes before the game time or before tip, or 45 minutes about. And when I read it, I was like, oh my God, it's happening. They actually did it. We misread all the tea leaves. We misread everything. We did it. It was all wrong. Like, go back and listen to
tea
our
leaves at all.
It was like, we just guessed all wrong about what everything meant. It all meant nothing. He's actually in the rotation. He's a core part of what they're going to do. He's not going to start the season. That he started in place of Cam Johnson. He's not going to start instead of Simmons, right? So, like, I think that's pretty clear. But the fact that he was with this group as a starter, and Jacque Vaughn came and said it was like a testament to how hard he'd been working, and because they was asked about it prior to the game, and he basically just kind of heaped some praise on him. Really, if you are of the Cam Thomas group of wanting to see this guy out here and pulling your hair out, literally and figuratively, around why he's not playing, this to me was clear that, like, at least to start the season, he's part of the plan.
But by the way, and this is insane, you mentioned Jacque Vaughn heaping the praise. It was like, you didn't say this was these words were never spoken at any point the entire offseason. And in some ways, I tip my hat. I tip my hat to Jacque Vaughn and the Nets organization, because for whatever reason, the coyness that they chose to approach Cam Thomas with, I think it's incredible. Like, I think it was almost like, he really did have a lot to work on and develop, and he still does. We know that. But that over the last 2 years, we actually felt like he was taking the steps forward, and we were just waiting for the time when we were going to go ahead and let he's going to be a part of this. You said everything correct there as far as what the role we think will be going into the season, but it's critical. The sample size tonight is always the reminder. He is a guy that can go and get you buckets, and this team is going to need that from him in that role specifically. And it becomes interesting as we'll think about as we work our way through preseason what the other combinations are going to look like and how he can be productive and consistent without maybe falling into some of those traps that we know he can when he gets a little ball dominant.
He really made hay in the second half when like it was not the non-starter minutes and he was just leading that the kind of, I would call it like the third unit, almost like second, third unit at that point. So, 86% true shooting. So he was absolutely on fire, but I'll throw the little asterisk around that it was mostly against when all the starters were gone. Okay. Now
him and Austin Reeves going toe to toe, bucket for bucket, right?
I was going to make a Team USA joke about that, but then I just I got busy doing something else. I was like, swap Cam for Austin Reeves and the US wins gold. But just saying I thought in general, honestly, the 26 points was just kind of nice. I actually don't even think that that's surprising. We already know he can do this. Like we've seen him do this in NBA games. So this is not surprising. It's not even to me encouraging. The thing that's encouraging is the role. Like this is the thing we always wondered about is where does he stand? Where does he stand in the hierarchy here? Where does he stand in the pecking order? Is he going to get a chance? Is this going to be a thing where he's clearly here somewhere to start and he's going to get a chance to maybe play his way into it and stay there or play his way out of it? Is he going to even, because I think one thing we just kind of never understood about him was why does it not seem like he gets a chance? It wasn't even it was just, he just would disappear. Like he would just disappear and no one really could understand why. This to me, starting with him in the starting lineup here is just as good of a sign as you could ever hope to have. Again, you could probably hear it in my voice. I was shocked that he started. It's good.
No, it really is a great sign. And you mentioned it there just about why not? Why not the chance? That's all it was. Let the results speak for themselves. And hopefully we're going to get that. Before we move over into rotation and roles here, because we can just talk a little bit about the pecking order coming in off the bench, guys that stayed in to close this thing out, obviously, and what indications that give us. I also thought, remember, this is preseason. The scores are going to be all over the place. But the fact that Mikal Bridges just kind of had a quiet game, it wasn't like he was looking to take over or dominate any portion of this. 15 minutes. It was a 2 of 7 shooting performance, 8 points. The Nets put up 61 points by whatever standard in preseason. Now, at that stage, they'd given up, I think, 75 in the first half, but they were able to be offensively productive even when Mikal Bridges was not carrying the lion's share. When we get to the regular season, Mikal needs to be giving us 25 points a night. But it was nice to see that even as they're figuring this out, you could see guys taking that baton at different times and finding a way to get some offensive success, because there will be stretches when the opposition will take Mikal away from you and you're going to need to rely on somebody else. So I mean, they have a lot to figure out, but I almost like that it was a quiet first preseason game from Mikal.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I think the usage will end up being high for him. I do actually think if Cam Thomas is sharing the court, the usage actually won't be as high. I mean, Thomas is still a pretty high usage guy, right? Even when he's sharing the court with other guys. I think tomorrow's episode, I mean, we kind of made it a point to just probably stick with the positives here. I think there are other takeaways, and we're going to for the rest of this episode. It's first game back. It's, we're pretty excited. Simmons, Cam, all this other stuff. And I think we'll keep it mostly positive here. I will say probably on Wednesday's episode, right, because this will be Tuesdays. I think there's plenty to look at the Nets did a lot differently in this game, and we're going to talk about some of that stuff. Like there was clear possible just strategic shifts that they made in this game that were, I mean, huge. So we'll talk about those, and they didn't look amazing when they did it. So we'll talk about that in a later episode or later on this week. But yeah, no, in general, I'm not really concerned with the Bridges thing. I think Bridges, honestly, even though the track record is pretty short in this role, he was the best player in the Nets last year. He's the best player in Team USA. Like he's just, there's one game he could have 5 straight bad games, and this wasn't even a bad one, but he could have 5 quiet games, and my opinion wouldn't even begin to shift on him.
Yeah, I like being able to focus on other guys and not even really worry about Mikal in that regard. Coming up here in a second, let's talk about the first guys that were off the bench. Let's give a little look at Dennis Smith Jr. and some of the veterans that were out there as well. And what can we glean around where the rotation hierarchy stands for Brooklyn? Okay, so the Brooklyn Nets 129-126 loss in the preseason opener. Score doesn't matter, but The one thing that we can take away here is Day'Ron Sharpe and Dorian Finney-Smith were the first guys to come in. They staggered the off the bench rotation. Unfortunately, Day'Ron goes down. We'll update that as it becomes more available around his ankle injury. And then it was Lonnie Walker, Royce O'Neal, and Dennis Smith Jr. There are veterans mixed in there. Little footnote here. Did you know that Spencer Dinwiddie is actually the oldest player on the team? He's older than Royce, but they go in months. April, May, June is like the hierarchy of those guys. He is the oldest player. But you end up with the veterans.
Good. Yeah, good. Sorry.
No. You end up with those veterans. That was a rhetorical question, Doug. I knew you knew.
Gotcha.
You end up with these veterans on the court, which I think we knew was going to be the case. But we also get our first sample size of not only Dennis Smith Jr., but Lonnie Walker actually makes an earlier appearance than maybe we were thinking or anticipating. We kind of acknowledged that we maybe overlooked him a little bit with everything going on this offseason. What did you like initially from those guys coming in? And did that first five make sense to you as far as who you wanted to see?
I think after the surprise from Cam Thomas, in terms of the starting, I really actually wasn't that surprised at anything else that happened here.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you couldn't even account for anything else after that. Once Cam Thomas took the court, it was all over.
No, yeah, I did. I got just to go back to him one more time. I got like legit excited when I saw that because that really was more than this would be a final thing on him for now, but that really was more than just a start for him. That this was a planting the flag that you're part of this you're part of what we're doing here. Like that was like, I think that there was more, it wasn't just, just some, hey, let's see what happens. This was, you're part of this. This is definitive. You're going to have to be probably pretty bad to like get your way out of it. Like I thought it was more than just, just calling your name out to start the game. The rest of it after him, I wasn't really surprised by what happened here. DFS and Royce are going to come in pretty early if they're not starting. Veterans, they're going to have to get playing time this year, even if just for nothing else to boost the trade value, right? Like, so I think like that's going to be expected. They're going to make spot starts when there's injuries. I think those guys are, just sort of, Swiss Army knife, especially Royce, Swiss Army knife enough to play. We had predicted Darius Bazley would start, so that was obviously wrong, but he was part of that next group that came in.
So
I'm not really that
comes in.
Yeah. I'm not that surprised overall that this was the group of guys. Short of just, breaking down what each of them did in the game, I really actually wasn't that surprised with any of that stuff either. So not to just bury this and just say, we learned nothing, but I do think that the Nets, after the big questions of like, hey, is Simmons going to start? Okay, great. Is what's going to happen with Cam Thomas? After those guys are answered, the rest of this doesn't really break down in any sort of surprising way. Now, I could see a situation as they go on where this changes some, right? Because I think that I don't think anyone's job is necessarily safe here outside of like Bridges and Cam Johnson and Claxton and maybe Simmons at this point. I'm not sure there's like safety in all these guys, but at least to start, if gun to my head, this is probably what I would have said was going to be around what the rotations were going to be, once we knew Cam was starting.
Yeah, we know Jacque Vaughn, the Brooklyn Nets, they're loyal to the veterans. When you mentioned Royce and you mentioned DFS. Dennis Smith Jr., I mean, listen, one of the things we'll talk about, we're going to save it for the next episode. We want him to be the anchor of that second unit defense. We wanted to bring that tenacity. This team struggled in a key area when we talk about perimeter defense in this game, but we'll save that. The other note that talking about these guys, I think just from a hierarchy, while it can change, Dennis Smith Jr., Bazley, Royce O'Neal, Lonnie Walker, and DFS played in a 5-man unit for a stretch. You also had Ben Simmons, Cam, Royce O'Neal, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Harry Giles get in there for the mix. Now, when you get to the back end of this fourth quarter, I think one of the things you also look at is that Lonnie Walker is still out there. Now, there's just a numbers game. Somebody has to be out there and playing. But as was Bazley, we didn't see Trendon Watford until the back end of this. And we also got some Jalen Wilson, some Noah Clowney. So you do get a little bit of a pecking order here. But to your point about it being fluid, I do think with the young guys, not Noah Clowney and Jalen Wilson, I'm very interested to keep watching him. But a guy like Trendon Watford, when you see him in that closeout, it's all a bunch of, the back end of the roster guys. I think they're trying to find ways, again, just like I said at the top with Ben Simmons and Nicholas Claxton and being able to share that same role when one is off the court or the other. They want to find repeatable processes here. Harry Giles, whether he's going to have a role or not, I see why they have him because he's a bigger body. He's not super athletic, but he can play a little physical, can be down by the basket. They need to be able to duplicate these things. Baisley, athleticism, play in space, be able to maybe create your own shot for yourself. I don't know who's going to come out, when all the dust settles, but I think they're trying to put those guys behind Royce, behind Dorian Finney-Smith, and say, you can eat away at them and at some point maybe overtake them if the production dictates it.
Yeah, actually, I should have said too, along those same lines of what you just said. Excuse me. I think some of this did get messed up when Day'Ron got hurt. Like, I think those Giles, excuse me, because I'm choked up about the Sharp injury.
When he gets hurt, when guys get hurt, Doug, he hates to see it.
Yeah, because like Giles was kind of so they brought Claxton back in, but then they played Harry Giles after that. Like, I do think that was probably supposed to be all Sharp's minutes. Yeah. And they were like, hey, we need a big here because we're gonna play some drop coverage, which they did a lot, which we'll talk about on another show. But so I do think like that actually screwed up things up a little bit, like where I'm not sure what came out of it. I think we probably saw more Harry Giles than was the plan. And I think that was like directly a 1-to-1 thing with Sharp. And then they went with like some lineups. They went with one where, I mean, basically DFS was the 5. It was like Dennis Smith Jr., Lonnie, Baisley, DFS, and Royce. And yeah, so I think that like the guys that they have some fluidity and being able to mix and match. I think offense will always be a problem. All these guys, you mentioned Watford. He's fascinating because, I mean, he basically played point guard when he was out there, and that wasn't just like a mistake either. There was at least 3 times where he just brought the ball up. 2 were off misses, so maybe it was like he was just the closest guy, but they really ran like real offense through him to the point where it seemed like that was the plan more than anything else. So he's kind of fascinating because I think among all the other guys that stood out here, he stood out actually just because he played something different than I thought he was going to play. Like, I don't think any of the other guys, like Darius Baisley, I was like, okay, that makes sense to me. And everybody else made sense. But Watford, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, they're running sort of like top of the key action for him. And I don't know. Maybe that's really, really, if that's sticky, then we're talking about a totally different dude. So that's something to keep an eye out for. But he was so far back in the rotation, it's kind of hard to know what the plan is here.
And it is funny because this is where, and we'll close out after this and remind everybody, YouTube, we're going to give you like a tight 5 at the back end of this one on a across the coast game. But we do want to acknowledge everybody that came in for our first live heading into the regular season. I give myself the pat on the back for saying I wanted the Nets to get him in the offseason. They finally get him. I'm excited. I think he can have a role. But then when he gets on the court tonight, it was impressive, but it's not what I thought it was going to be, and, in a good way. So I can't take like full credit because I was not thinking Trendon Watford point forward for the Brooklyn Nets. But this is, and take the minutes for what they're worth, but this is what it was supposed to be about, right? This offseason, this preseason, all of these young guys, let's see what they can be. That's the point of bringing in so many young players to see how they can develop. So as we get these next 2 preseason games, that'll be the talking point. Who gets a little bit of a larger role? Let's go ahead.
I want to say one more thing about Watford. Adam and I are in a group chat with a bunch of just like really hardcore Nets fans. I'm not going to shout them out every name here because I'll miss somebody. I think, but they saw they just posted in the chat that they're watching, and I can't get this to scroll back enough. But someone in the chat, oh shoot, I just wanted to give the name. I can't find it. Someone compared him to like how Kyle Anderson is used, and I was like, oh, and I thought that was a really good comp. And by next show, I'll make sure I get who it was correctly. And I was like, oh, that's interesting because that little slow-mo action where he doesn't really, it's not an eye test thing with him, but then you watch it, you always kind of wonder how it's working, but it keeps working. But he's just kind of a big guy who can facilitate offense, who can worm his way into the lane. I thought that was a really apt comparison. So I'll make sure I get the name next time. But so if you start, next time you watch Trendon Watford, think of Kyle Anderson. And I think that comp was pretty astute. And so anyway, it's just something to think about for next time. But we have tons of stuff. We have tons of stuff to talk about because we have a whole episode here of sort of like not so great stuff from this one.
And shout out to Billy Reinhardt, who posted up in that group conversation, watching us, and everybody hopefully is. So listen, that's it for me, man. It's a great preseason game. The loss doesn't matter. Good sample sizes, great returns on Cam Thomas being a part of this unit, great returns on the health of Ben Simmons. Now it's just about building off of that, right? Let's see what happens next. Let's see how we'll get into the areas that they need to focus on and improve on. But all I wanted was basketball and healthy players out there. Unfortunately, with Day'Ron Sharp, at least one negative. But otherwise, this is what you wanted to see from a first preseason game against the Lakers.
Yeah, okay. And Billy Reinhardt just put in there that it was Brooklyn Nets 85. So BKN 85, who, if you're on Twitter, is just one of the most active
Billy
Nets
Reinhardt does
people.
double duty. He's also beat reporter for Locked On Nets when we need him. We call him favors.
So there you go. So I got the thing. So BKN 85 was who threw it out there. All right, we are going to get out of here. We're going to hang out here for like 5-10 minutes in YouTube, just because first night action. If you are listening on the podcast feed, that is your bad, because you are not on YouTube, and there's just extra stuff that happens on YouTube. So listen on the podcast. We need the numbers to always climb up. What you're going to need to do: listen, download for sure, and then go over and listen on YouTube. Just do them both. That's just the number one way to help the podcast. Both are totally free. Subscribe to wherever you listen on podcasts. Subscribe wherever you listen on YouTube. Or
we are back. We are back, and we are getting our friends back. The Wolf Pack is back. That's hangover. Let's just leave it at that.
All of them, the all-time great poets, are back again tomorrow and right away here on YouTube with more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball, preseason basketball. Yeah. All right, like you say, a fast 5 here because, guys, it gets late and we're enthusiastic. We're excited, but look behind those eyes of Doug Norrie. He's getting tired. Everybody in here, by the way, though, a great crowd to kick things off with. Appreciate some of the frequent flyers. We know so many of these guys. The same thing. I won't shout out everybody here. I did highlight a couple of ones throughout this. I'm sure there's plenty more. Yeah. I'm throwing this up just because I like this. It's just enthusiasm. Brooklyn Nets basketball is back, right? A little more spacing and shot creation, and we're a solid team. Looking forward to what this team can become. We're going to talk about the solid floor spacing and then some of the areas that they can focus on. Anybody else jump out to you, though, Doug, that you wanted to highlight here?
I wasn't looking. Sorry, I was kind of focused on the podcast. Let me just go back to this one. Let me go before you put this one up here. And Jonathan's a long-time listener, so I want to get to it. I do want to say that excitement. It is hilarious how two little things. Well, they're not little, but two things can happen which can totally flip the way you feel about this game. And really, and we started the podcast talking about like Simmons, the part where Simmons just looks healthy. Like that's it. Yeah. Just look healthy, right? That flips so much of what you think about the team for sure in a really, really meaningful way. And then the part with the Cam thing, which I don't know if like that's a huge needle mover as in like the wins and losses category, right? Like I don't think he's like a swing guy when it comes to just 10 wins or something. That's a crazy number. Even like a few wins, but it represents a shift in how the organization is thinking, and I think that's the most important thing, right? So I don't think like Cam Thomas represents the difference of, being the 4th seed or missing the playoffs or anything crazy like that. Simmons could be that kind of guy. But the part where it's just like, oh, there's just like a shift happening here. I think just those two things alone are enough to get really excited about. So then you can throw the other one up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's the high and low level. I think that's what you're bookending there, right? The high level is Ben Simmons and the player that he's been and he's capable of, and the real impact that he can have on this team, securing a top 6 seed, not being in the play-in, right? All of those things helping to unlock this team in a new way. Cam Thomas is the philosophical shift. We know we have young guys. We know we're not championship caliber right now, and we need to be committed to giving these players opportunities, and Cam Thomas should be at the front of that line, and that showed that, okay, it looks like he finally is after a couple of years. So, yeah, I 100% agree with you. I have the Jonathan one up here. Do Locked On Nets, that's us, think that Cam Thomas...
we're trading them already. God,
I know. See, this is why I want to throw it up.
We can't trade him. Come on.
Given his age and his and the scoring ability, sorry, I was glitching there. Next superstar, or is Cam viable as a 6th man? I think my answer to this would be, first of all, shame on you, Jonathan. we love you, but don't talk trade. My answer to this would be he represents the future beyond even Mikal Bridges and maybe beyond Cameron Johnson. So if you think he can be a productive player for you, even beyond the scoring, you don't want to send this player off. Now, I don't know why. I can't believe I'm going down this road. If you got to a place where you looked at this team and Ben Simmons and all of a sudden, hey, we're nipping at the heels of a 6-5 seed here, and there's some real movement over these next couple of years, and there's a trade to be had for a higher profile player, of course. By the way, the more productive and on-court time that Cam Thomas gets is the more attractive he's going to become to teams. So I'm sure those conversations will happen, but let's go ahead and wait. Hey, you can't knock that light down on me. until let's wait a minute before we go talking about, the one preseason game he gets in the starting lineup, and now let's ship him off for something. Let's let it.
I know, and I know
Jonathan's
not. I know Jonathan's not doing it. It all comes from a sense of positivity, because I think like it was hard to think about Cam in any way but confused, right? Like I think that's just where we've been stuck in the confusion zone with him for so long that he wasn't even like, what does he have a trade market? Who knows? He doesn't play. Right? Just like who knows what his market is? Who knows how everyone thinks of him? So I think it's him playing hopefully is best of both worlds. With it's either like, oh, you can envision him as a piece of the future, like he's like, I don't know, you think he become like, a poor man's Bradley Beal or something like that, or is he like become really viable in the eyes of another team who is going to unload someone, and now all of a sudden he's, Tyrese Maxey or something like that, you can envision. He's not getting traded, but you know what I mean? Like these young guys that other teams would covet if there was like a big move being made. And so I think for him, just on the court time will be good. It is hilarious. Like the guy just has ripped up Vegas for just a million points, and it's like Summer League MVP, 28 points a game the next year, 26 points tonight. Just like put this guy in Vegas. I said he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, but
the only trade that you ever make with Cam Thomas is if the expansion team goes to Vegas. Then you say it just makes too much sense. How could we keep this guy from having a permanent residency in Vegas? Would it be crazy to start Cam over?
This is going to be, this is, who's going to start. I would still start Dinwiddie. I think that Dinwiddie is better, and he had a kind of a rough game at times, especially on defense in this game. But I still think you always play Dinwiddie here, and with the hope that, you can maybe flip him at the deadline or something like that. I think he is better. Like he's a more complete player. I know Cam's like is a better overall scorer, but I think that Dinwiddie's probably more important in the flow of the offense to have. So I don't think I would make this move, but I'm already saw multiple people on my timeline and in my mentions mentioning this. So that will be something that I'm sure comes up many times. People love to hate on Dinwiddie. I think it's gone a little far with him, but yeah.
Yeah, and there's actually some good stats that we can get into about him and why he can be productive, especially with Ben Simmons, just like we talk about with Cam Thomas. Everybody gets better when you have Ben Simmons fully healthy and really helping out that offensive system. And listen, I could go through 1,000 of these. We're going to go ahead and we're going to button this one up. But here's the good thing. Do two things. One, we've told you before about getting over for the subtext. Be a part of that. It's 100% worth doing. It's a ton of fun. Go check it out if you want to. Here it is with the subtext.com Locked On Nets. But also, if you have questions and comments that you want us to discuss, get into the YouTube community, get into the video conversations. I'll post up what are additional questions or thoughts you have coming out of this first preseason game. Bullet point it out for us, because we want to and are going to dissect this thing 6 ways from Sunday before preseason game number 2. So we want to hear from everybody. You know how much we appreciate you being on the live here. Doug, you can go ahead and close this out, and I think we'll be back again tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll just give a little
diving in on where they need to improve.
Yeah, I'll just give a quick sneak peek about some of the stuff we're going to talk about in the improvement area. We won't go into it all now, and these are some things to like sort of chew on if these were what you were thinking about for the team. So there was clear areas that they struggled with. They played a totally different defensive scheme tonight than they had played. Yes. They played a ton of drop. Which really requires the guards to fight over screens, and they just didn't do it at all. And so it's going to be really interesting to see if that was like shell stuff that they're running just because it's preseason, or so that's one thing that we'll really talk about. And I still, we came out with praise around Simmons and Claxton, and just in terms of like, that we're hoping it'll work itself out. There were times where that looked like pretty rough, right, on offense. So the offense did look pretty rough. So I think we'll focus on that. That's just like a sort of a sneak peek of some of the stuff that we'll talk about tomorrow when we talk about areas of like clear need and improvement that we saw in this first game.
You better believe it, guys. Thank you so much for being a part of the YouTube Live. We do them all season long, and we'll be back again tomorrow talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.